Hello, mamas, and welcome back to episode 3 in our vagus nerve podcast series. Today, we're talking all about the vagus nerve in pregnancy and birth. Enjoy!
Hey, mama, I'm sending you wonderful pregnancy vibes. It's time for you to guide you through. Let's take some time for you. It's pregnancy with Physio Laura.
Hello, mamas, and welcome back to our third and final episode in our vagus nerve podcast series with the wonderful Dr. Carrie Rigoni. Today, we are applying everything we've learned in the first 2 episodes into the prenatal period. So we're specifically talking about how all this information on the vagus nerve and toning the vagal nerve, and if you don't know what I'm talking about, you have to go check out episode 1 and 2 before you jump into this one, because you'll have no basis of understanding, trust me, before you go and jump into this one. So check out episode 1 and 2, then listen to today's episode, because it's all about how the vagus nerve applies to pregnancy and birth. So in today's episode, we're going to be talking about how to prepare your vagus nerve for birth, how the vagus nerve explains why women respond differently to birth trauma, pregnancy stress, and the postpartum period, how the vagus nerve helps you to feel safe, and this is why women need different environments to birth in, which I think is really helpful in validating the different choices women will make around birth. And then I personally share quite a vulnerable journal entry about my most recent parenting challenges and how this work is really pertinent in my life right now. So I get pretty vulnerable, but that is me. I'm an open book. However, vulnerability hangover, I would love to hear from you. If you also resonate with what I shared in my journal entry and with Carrie, please come on over to @PhysioLaura and tell me I'm not a terrible parent. Please come and make me feel like, you too might be feeling the same way I'm feeling. So yeah, I really hope you love this episode. And if you do, like I said, jump on over to Physio Laura on my social media and let me know. And if you love Carrie and you want to connect with her more, she is at Dr. Carrie Rigoni on Instagram. She shares some amazing reels and videos. I think you're going to really love her. But without further ado, mamas, let's jump into this chat with Carrie all about the vagus nerve in the prenatal period. Enjoy. Let's talk now about specifically pregnancy, birth, and that postpartum phase, because I know that this really applies to that period of time. So how would you encourage women during pregnancy to prepare their vagus nerve for birth?
Pregnancy is such a vulnerable time for us that we actually need more external cues of safety. So you think about what's happening, we're growing a human, particularly in that last trimester. We really need cues of safety that maybe our body isn't giving us. So that could be a safe person, whether that's your partner, or maybe you're already working with a doula before the birth, or your midwife, or your obstetrician, whoever you feel safe with, but finding someone that helps you feel safe, particularly leading up to the birth, means that you're not going to activate the fight or flight. We know that birth happens much easier when we're not in that stressed out state. So we really want to calm that as much as physically possible.
Yes.
The other thing to really be mindful of is I struggle talking about this because I always feel like I might offend someone. So there's no guilt, there's no judgment, but this hustle that we have, this hustle culture of, I see so many women in my practice who work up to 38 weeks, and the last month of work is actually them doing their workload plus training someone who's going to replace them. So the workload goes up when they're pregnant. It should be going down. I think as a culture, we're not honoring pregnant women and the vulnerability that their nervous system is in, whether they, consciously feel vulnerable or not. It's this somatic bottom-up process that's happening inside our body. It's telling our brain we're vulnerable, whether we're aware of it or not. So if you can stop work sooner, or set some boundaries around how much work you're going to do, or how much training you're going to train this new person who's replacing you, if that is a reality for you, then I encourage you to jump on that, because that's just going to help your nervous system regulate itself, particularly if then you're adding in all the stuff we've just talked about, the chest breathing, and you're actually activating the vagus and activating a sense of safety within yourself, if your external environment is also feels safe for you, so that's, you know, your house, the people, everything, then that's going to play a huge role in how the final stage of your pregnancy and how your birth proceeds.
It's such a good point, really, isn't it? Like, as society, I think we're just starting to understand how important it is to nourish the postpartum woman. But I really don't think we've translated that to pregnancy so much, really, have we? Like, you know, you have the token gesture of someone offering you a seat on the bus if you're lucky. But when it comes to work expectations and societal expectations, we really don't value a pregnant woman resting until they've had a baby. Then for some reason, we seem to think, oh, yes, fair enough. You know, you've got a newborn. But we don't really do the same thing with pregnancy, I don't think. Like, you're right. The you know, common case is that women are hustling to get things ready, to get organized. They might have a token week or two off in quotation marks. They're probably doing a hell of a lot of life admin then, and then they have a baby, and it's like they've spent that whole time being go, 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 hustle, 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 rush, rush, rush. And that is quite stressful, really, isn't it? Like, pregnancy is a time to really invite yourself to rest and recharge and regroup and look after yourself. But it is challenging when that may not be supported socially. I totally understand that that's challenging. So it's not a guilt thing, 100% not. It's just maybe how could you invite more of that into your own life, regardless of your circumstances? I guess we can always still be working on it better ourselves. I know we can put ourselves in positions where we say yes too often and we don't say no enough, and putting in those boundaries in place. So again, I think that's really acknowledged for the postpartum women these days, but not really for the pregnant woman. So yeah, really important. So obviously then in birth, it's super important for a woman to feel safe. So I imagine then that everything you've been preparing a woman for in pregnancy is also going to translate into birth. So making sure that they feel safe in their environment and that they feel safe with their providers.
Yeah. And I think this is super important for women to understand, because I feel like there are definitely particular camps, you know, like which way you decide to birth and who you decide to birth with. And it can become like not competitive, but you kind of like find your people who want reality. It doesn't matter what anyone else is doing. It's what you need to feel safe. So someone might only feel safe at home with a midwife, and someone else might only feel safe if they've scheduled a C-section. And neither is wrong, because everything in your life has led you to this point, and your nervous system needs to feel safe. So no matter what your choices are, there shouldn't be this shame or judgment if someone's chosen something different. Because when you understand the driving factor above all else in our life, our nervous system's first question is, do I feel safe?
Yes.
And if it says yes, then, you know, kudos to you. You know, that's what we all want for our birth, is to feel that safety.
Absolutely. I think that's, really important, because there can be, I think there is maybe not competitiveness, but there certainly can feel like a hierarchy in birth. Like, everyone should aim for, you know, this sort of birth. And if you didn't get that, then maybe you're lesser than. I remember having a C-section and people kind of apologizing to me as if like it was assumed I had a bad experience. And I've talked about this on the podcast before, but there is no one right way to birth. Like, there is only the right way for you. And like you said, where you feel most comfortable. So in my last birth, having home birth, that is where I felt safest. And that would have scared the bejesus out of majority of my social circle. There's no way they would have felt safe doing what I did. But for me, and you can't understand it because it's not you, but for me, that felt like the safest place for me to be. If I had gone to a hospital, I would not have felt safe. And I have a friend who literally just gave birth yesterday, who was like, as soon as I contract, get me to a hospital, because I will freak out if I'm at home. I do not feel safe being on my own away from my care providers. I want to be with my midwives. I want to be looked after by them. And I'm like, that is so awesome that you've acknowledged that, because you're going to transfer earlier. Because I think in, say, someone like that situation, maybe they're told, oh, but you should stay at home as long as possible. You don't want to go to the hospital too early, blah, 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 blah. You should increase your chance of interventions, whatever. But that woman if she had stayed home as long as possible because that's what everyone told her to do, she wouldn't have had probably a great birth experience because her cortisol would have been so high. I can't
Exactly.
imagine her labor would have continued very well because she would have been stressed. So it's really cool to acknowledge, where do you feel safe? Not where you're told you should feel safe or what you should want, but where does your body tell you I feel most safe, and with whom as well? That's really important to make sure that the people in your birth environment make you feel safe.
Yeah.
I think I know a friend had her mother-in-law come in and that was not a safe option, but she didn't know how to say no. And
Yeah.
I don't think that was positive for her because she didn't feel safe with that person in the room. So it's really important. Safety, safety, safety. And that could look on paper 100 million different ways. So I think that's really important to acknowledge. So thank you for sharing that. And the same with, you mentioned when we were talking about this podcast that it might also explain the way our vagus nerve works, how women respond differently to birth trauma. Could you maybe explain that one a little bit more?
Yeah. So, I mean, we know that birth trauma is very subjective, and, you know, my experience, say we had the exact same experience, I might find it traumatic and you don't. And the thing to remember, I mean, it does come down to safety, but also that the vagus nerve it creates the lens with which we look at life. So if your vagal tone is low and you look at most things with hypervigilance because your sympathetic fight or flight has taken over, then you're going to activate that much faster. And if you don't have the ability to kind of regulate after and come back into that parasympathetic, higher vagal tone state and actually process what's going on for you, if you're stuck in that fight or flight, then things can feel a lot more traumatic for the nervous system, because it's like, well, I'm not safe and these things are happening potentially out of my control. So I've lost control. I really want to fight or flight, but I can't because, you know, maybe I've had an epidural and I can't move. You know, all of these things, we lose control of the situation. Then if we can't regulate after, so those women who do kind of realize that they potentially have low vagal tone, or maybe we don't feel safe after, we haven't got that postpartum period to debrief or, you know, have that beautiful little bubble at home. Maybe, you know, like you say, mother-in-law's coming over and expecting you to wait on them hand and foot as opposed to them looking after you, and those sort of things, we're not given that time and space to regulate, then that's going to feel a lot more traumatic, just because of where our nervous system is sitting.
Yeah, that makes so much sense. And how does low vagal tone, how would that translate into the postpartum period for women as well? Because I imagine that would equal much more overwhelm, and maybe trouble sleeping when you're already, you know, struggling with sleep. Like what sort of things would women experience postpartum?
Yeah, so there is a little bit of research. Some researchers followed some pregnant women and measured their blood cortisol, stress hormone, and then they followed the babies after for signs of stress. And what they found is that mums who had high levels of cortisol throughout their pregnancy were more likely to have babies who showed more signs of high stress. And so what happens is we have a baby who's potentially on the more irritable side of the scale, who needs more safety from us. But if we have low vagal tone, we struggle to regulate ourselves, let alone co-regulate with our baby. So we perceive our babies crying, like that triggers us even more because we're not coming from a regulated state. So in essence, everything kind of feels harder. And I, you know, like I look back at my firstborn and the state I was in and the way that I perceived things. And I feel like I did, well, you know, you do the best with what you've got, but I can see that pattern there. I was focusing on fixing my baby for crying so much and being really high needs and a koala baby and not giving me the space and making me feel really touched out. And really, I'd never stopped and did anything to myself because I was just stuck in that state. So it can make or break the postpartum period. And I find that women who have lower vagal tone tend to struggle a bit more with, say, the post-birth blues, the baby blues, or, just rebalancing of their hormones, because their cortisol is still so high. So everything's just trying to resettle, and it's just, everything is harder.
Absolutely.
They may need, again, if their body's not giving them the internal safety cues, then it might be a time where they need more external safety cues. So you can plan for this. If you know that your stress regulation is not great, and maybe you're listening to this podcast and you're towards the end of your pregnancy and you're like, well, I don't have time to activate my vagus nerve and do all these things. Well, you can create that external safety by making that little bubble, only, set those boundaries, only letting people in who make you feel calm and safe, or who are actually going to care for you. Not forcing yourself to follow cultural or societal or familial expectations, but actually, again, that same question, well, does this make me feel safe? Does this make me feel loved? No? Okay, well, that can wait, because right now this is the most important thing for me to be able to bond with my baby.
That's so important. And I actually only realized recently in my motherhood journey that co-regulation with our children was even a thing, that they essentially borrow our nervous systems to regulate themselves. And you would know this better than me, I assume, but that goes on for a while. Are they like 7 or 8 before they start doing that themselves?
Yeah. And I mean, it's actually something that happens even between adults. So we have these nerves called mirror neurons, and we mirror who we're around. And this is part of how we become like the 5 people that we spend the most time with, because our mirror neurons actually communicate and go, oh, well, that's the state they're in, so I'm going to meet them. And it happens subconsciously. We don't even know. So really, even if you've had, say, you reflect and think, oh gosh, my pregnancy was really stressful, I feel bad about that. Well, now's the time to regulate yourself, because you can still co-regulate with your child, and all of our behaviors and our regulation or dysregulation system, what's normal or abnormal. So we really want to guide their nervous system. And the easiest way to do that is to activate our own nervous system and our vagal networks.
Absolutely. And I feel like you pretty much finished the podcast on that. It sums it all up, really, doesn't it? But I was just thinking about the woman that might think, yeah, it's too late for me to do this work, or yeah, I'm about to give birth and I haven't done it. But yeah, if your child is doing this for 7 years, like, you really need to work on it, because you are going to be their co-regulator. So I think that's really cool to know. It's a long-term thing. It's not just if I didn't work on it, time's up, I haven't got any chance now. It's a forever thing. And even once our kids are older, we still need to work on it for ourselves, so that we can live calm, healthy lives, and again, thrive, not just survive. So I think that's super important. I did want to just touch on, as the last thing, about, you mentioned before we started recording about how babies, when they're born, I think it was called the social engagement system, and what babies need to feel safe immediately after birth and things like that. Could you maybe just touch on that? I think this would be really relevant for those women going into birth and postpartum soon.
So the social engagement system is part of the vagus nerve. So it's kind of like the social engagement system is what makes us really want to socialize in general. So you think about when you're really stressed, and the tone of voice you might use, your body language, whether you really want to make eye contact with someone, those sort of things, they drop away when we're in fight or flight. When we have enough vagal activation, we tend to have a calmer tone of voice. It's not that high-pitched, stressed out voice, and more musical, actually. We tend to go up and down a little more with our tone. Our facial expressions look different. The way we smile, if our ventral vagus or our social engagement system is activated, we smile with our eyes if we're just smiling for the sake of it and we're really stressed, we tend to just move our mouth in the position, but our eyes don't change. So you can pretty much tell even from a smile how stressed someone is. But because our baby is still learning about the world, all of these things matter. All these things either show signs of safety or threat. So if you are in a stress state and you're not, maybe you don't feel connected to your baby and you haven't really looked them in the face, or in the eyes, or you're not smiling at them, or when you're talking you already short and sharp because you just feel too agitated. These things imprint into our baby. They say, oh, well, if my caregiver doesn't feel safe right now, then I'm not going to feel safe. So in terms of the social engagement system, that's really what it's about, is like finding enough activation in our nervous system, in our vagal systems, to be able to want to socially engage with our baby. And then they start replicating that, and making coos and, little noises. And whether we respond or not, are we like looking at our phone being like, oh yeah, or are we like, oh yes, that's, what comes next, or whatever, actually engaging when they're trying to engage. And this doesn't stop just from the newborn period. You just think of a toddler who wants to show you something. And again, are we so stressed and maybe mindlessly scrolling, or are we stopping to engage for a moment? And that's going to activate their sense of connection, which is a social engagement system of the vagus nerve. So that helps strengthen their vagus nerve.
I love all of that. We've started eye gazing with our kids recently and they love it. I thought they would find it boring, but they love it. They actually, I say, like, mummy, daddy, eye gaze. And we just stare at each other's eyes, and it's really beautiful. It's again, so funny, the timing of all of this. I wrote in my journal the other day when I was feeling a bit overwhelmed with mothering and didn't feel like I was bringing my best self to the table. And I wrote that if I were to take a photo of my face every hour on the hour throughout the day, as sad as it is, but I think a lot of the time that photo would be me in some sort of frown or scowl or frustrated face, or like, sort of agitated. And I was like, that really hit me hard. I actually felt really upset about that, because I thought kids, they can see through it. So even if I'm like saying words that I think are, portraying one thing, but my face is saying something different, I'm like, they pick up on that. And I'm like, I don't want them to see a mum who's, brow is furrowed all the time. And, I want them to be not always, because it's not realistic. We are human, but to mostly be greeted with like warmth and softness and a smile, and, not a forced smile, like, oh, well done, sweetie, that's really good. But, oh my God, that's awesome, I'm so proud of you sort of smile. And that really hit hard for me. And I just thought, if I were to take a photo every hour on the hour, what does it look like? And what do I want it to look like? And what do I need to do to get to that point? So I don't know if that resonates with anyone else, but that one hit me really hard.
It's all that subconscious stuff. And our kids don't even have the rational brain to be like, oh yeah, well, I can see mum's had a hard day, maybe she's frowning. Like, they're still learning. They don't have the higher senses to rationalize anything. So that never kicks in. So what we do, it sounds like such a heavy task, but all of these little things that we do, it's teaching their nervous system. My son the other day snapped about something, and the way he snapped was exactly the way that I snap. And I was like, oh, I've done it. I've like primed his system.
Yeah, we've ruined them.
100%. It's innate. Like, they soak it all up, but it's subconscious. They don't even know what they're soaking up. It just becomes then their state of normal. So it's really important.
Mirrors, aren't they? Like, they just mirror everything. And it is such a harsh reality check when you see yourself in your children, especially in a bad light, because you're like, oh my God. I'll share a funny, maybe not so funny story. My son is 4.5, and he got really frustrated the other day and he said, effing hell. And I went, whoa, buddy, like you're allowed to be frustrated, but you can't say that. And he looked me dead in the eye and said, but mummy, you say that when you're angry. And I was like, touche, I do. I was like, you're right. And I had this really beautiful conversation with him where I was like, I really shouldn't say that. And I'm trying and I try and catch myself, but sometimes I forget, and we like got to a resolution of, well, maybe next time we're both angry, we could say this instead. And I just thought that is such a good example of like, not do as I say, do as I do sort of thing. Like you can't tell your child, don't say this if you're doing that, or don't react like this if that's how you're doing it. So I find parenting is just the biggest personal development tool you'll ever have. Hey.
Yeah. And like on that, the way you ended it is perfect for his nervous system, because it's like not authoritarian, like, yeah, that authoritarian, like, yeah, well, I'm allowed to because I'm the adult. It's like, hey, you know what? Yeah, you are right. And let's work out how we can resolve this together, because that's going to strengthen not only his vagal connections, because he's not going to feel shamed for saying it, but he's going to understand it. But then also it's going to create the autonomy for him in the future to respond in a way that's more appropriate. And, you also,
yeah.
but it's like not about perfection, because we're all human and we're all going to get dysregulated, and we're all going to do something that our kids are going to model of us. And we're going to be like, oh my God, why did I do that? Like, there's no perfection. We're all human. So when we're talking about this stuff, I think it's really important when we do mess up to acknowledge it. And, if our kids are old enough, talk about it with our kids, and, apologize if you need to, or talk it out and rebuild that connection, because the vagus works on connection. It's not just the in the moment stuff, but like the stop and the connection at the end of it that can rewire the whole thing. So
yeah, absolutely. And like you said, so much of it is having compassion for yourself, because I do think sometimes you can listen to these things and feel guilty, or feel like, how am I ever going to be enough because my nervous system is not coping, and all of these things. But I hope that our conversation today has empowered women to go, here some really easy, tangible things that you can do today, right now. It's not over there, it's here and now, that you can do yourself to help regulate your nervous system so you feel better, and so that your littlies can feel better too. So you can all have a really beautiful family dynamic as well, and be kind and compassionate, because it's a journey. It's not going to be something that you do overnight and then boom, done. You'll never be dysregulated ever again in your life. If only it was that simple. But thank you so much, Carrie. This has been such a wonderful conversation. I'm so glad that you put the vagus nerve on my radar and on all of the listeners' radar, because again, this is just not something I think is spoken about very much. It doesn't get a lot of airtime, and it makes so much sense. And I really like pulling it back to the biology and the tangible and the practical, because sometimes these conversations can feel a bit more airy fairy and harder to like ground yourself to actually do something with it. But I really like that you've kind of blended the two together. So thank you so much. Is there any final things you wanted to share?
No, I think we have literally covered everything.
Amazing. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me.
Hello, mamas. I really hope you loved that final episode with Dr. Carrie Rigoni, and I really hope that it's helped you understand how all of that vagal nerve information we spoke about in episodes 1 and 2 applies to pregnancy, birth, and the postpartum period. So I think this topic is super fascinating. I feel like we probably just scratched the surface, and it's probably something that I might come back for round 2 in the future, get Carrie back on and discuss it further. I feel like everywhere I see, people are talking about vagal nerve stuff at the moment. So I feel like it's really emerging. It's becoming much more mainstream. People are understanding it. But I really hope that these 3 episodes have given you a really good foundation for how to regulate your nervous system, how to get out of that fight or flight stress response all the time. I think this is such valuable work in the world that we're doing right now, and particularly in these transformative periods of pregnancy, birth, and postpartum. Like, it rocks your world, and your nervous system can be completely shot through this period. So I think if we can have the tools and the understanding and the education to bring ourselves back in balance, that is powerful, so powerful. So if you love this episode or this whole series, or if you have any questions you want to follow up, please jump on over to Physio Laura on Instagram or Facebook and let me know what you found really helpful from these episodes, or what questions you might have. And if you loved Carrie, you can find her on Instagram at Dr. Carrie Rigoni. She's a wealth of knowledge and really powerful chiropractor doing great work in this world. And if you want her epic bonus questionnaire that she's given to all my Pregnancy Posse members, it is a really simple questionnaire to fill in so that you can identify if there are problems with your vagal nerve tone, if there's something you might need to work on. It's a really easy way to identify if you've got low tone or high tone, because sometimes it's hard to listen to these and apply it to your own life. So for all Pregnancy Posse members, you can access that by going inside the membership, inside the podcast series. And if you want to join in and see what the fun is all about inside the Pregnancy Posse membership, we always have bonus content for all of these podcast series. The wonderful guest experts we have on always provide us with some sort of epic bonus. We have weekly tailored workouts for pregnancy, yoga, meditation. We have pelvic pain resources, rib pain, back pain, SIJ pain, pelvic floor problems, preparing your perineum, preparing for labor and birth. I could go on, but how about you just join me? I'll tell you more about it on the inside. I send everyone who fills in their questionnaire a little personalized video message, and I would love to hang out with you. So you can find out more information at thepregnancyposse.com, and you can trial it for 7 days, and hopefully I catch you on the inside there. Otherwise, mamas, please subscribe to the Pregnancy with Physio Laura podcast so you don't miss any of my upcoming amazing series. We've got some real goodies lined up. Particular one I'm really excited about. I've had to put the brakes on slightly to get something else ready for it, but yeah, there's some really cool ones coming up. So please do subscribe so you don't miss out. Wherever you are, I hope your nervous system is regulated, and if not, I hope you now feel like you have the tools to pull yourself back into balance, and I will chat to you all soon. Bye.